On the edge of a quiet suburban highway, a German shepherd limps painfully, its paws dragging with exhaustion. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows, and the only sound is the rhythmic hum of passing cars. It's clear the dog has been through a hellish ordeal, the faint whimpers of pain escaping its lips as it stumbles forward. In the back seat of a nearby car, a baby, barely 6 months old, stirs in their car seat. The baby's wide eyes catch the movement outside the window, and something in their gaze changes. A flicker of recognition, a spark of empathy, as if they understand the dog's pain. The bond is instant, unspoken. The baby, alone for a moment, stretches out tiny fingers toward the dog, a small, unsteady hand that seems to beckon the creature. But as the dog's limping figure fades in the distance, an ominous noise suddenly fills the air. Tires screech as a speeding truck hurtles toward the intersection. The dog's limping form is barely visible now, and in an instant, the danger is palpable. The baby's soft cooing contrasts with the deadly silence that follows the truck's roar. The bond has just begun, but the journey that will test this fragile connection is about to unfold. Show your love. Hit like, share, and subscribe for more. The story begins in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, where a young family lives in a cozy house surrounded by trees and quiet streets. Inside, a baby girl named Lily is peacefully sleeping in her crib, her soft, rhythmic breathing filling the room. The light filtering through the windows casts a warm glow on her tiny face, and everything in the house feels calm and safe. In the same neighborhood, not far from Lily's home, a German shepherd limps slowly along the side of the road, its once pristine coat now matted and stained with dirt and blood. The dog's paws drag heavily, its movements labored with exhaustion and pain. It's clear that this animal has endured something far beyond what anyone could imagine. The deep, silent wounds of its journey are etched on its face as it stumbles from house to house, searching for refuge, food, and most of all, peace. As Lily's mother prepares a bottle in the kitchen, she hears a soft cry coming from Lily's room. The mother walks into the nursery, smiling gently as she reaches down to pick up her baby. Lily's tiny hands reach up to her mother, her eyes wide with innocence and wonder. Ready to face the world around her, Lily's gaze lands on the window, where a shadow flits by, the dog limping and struggling. For a moment, their eyes lock through the glass, and an unspoken connection forms between the two. Lily, in her pure innocence, reaches out toward the window, her fingers grasping at the air, as if trying to bridge the gap between herself and the creature on the other side. She seems to understand, on some innate level, the pain the dog is feeling. Her gaze softens with empathy, and she gives a small coo, the sound delicate yet full of emotion. The German shepherd, sensing something from the child, stops in its tracks. Its ears perk up slightly, and it turns its head toward the house, its golden eyes reflecting a fleeting moment of vulnerability. There's a deep, almost mystical silence between them. A silence that speaks volumes, louder than any words ever could. But then, a harsh noise disrupts the calm. Tires screech on the asphalt as a car races down the road. The dog's head snaps up, and fear floods its eyes. It stumbles backward, struggling to move quickly. In that instant, a truck appears on the horizon, barreling down the road, oblivious to the dog in its path. The baby, sensing the tension, lets out a small gasp, as if understanding that something important is about to happen. The world outside the window becomes a blur of speed, danger, and noise. Inside the house, Lily's mother looks up, hearing the screeching tires and noticing the urgency in Lily's eyes. She glances out the window, her heart catching in her throat as she sees the dog at the edge of the road. Time seems to slow. The baby and the dog are connected, a bond neither of them fully understands yet, but one that will guide them through a journey of survival, healing, and love. But for now, in this fleeting moment, the dog is in danger, and the baby's innocent wonderment is all that stands between the fragility of life and the rawness of survival. The dog must decide, will it fight for its life, or will it succumb to the road that has brought it here? And Lily, in her soft cradle of safety, can only watch, unaware that the fate of this creature now rests on the very essence of her being. The bond begins. The first quiet, fragile thread of connection between a dog and a baby that will grow to become an unbreakable lifeline. The next day, Lily's family sets out on a road trip. as they drive along the same highway where the German Shepherd was last seen. The air in the car is filled with the gentle hum of the road and the sound of tires on asphalt. Lily is fast asleep in her car seat, a soft, peaceful smile on her face, unaware of the world outside. The car slows as they approach a familiar stretch of road. The father, with a relaxed smile on his face, notices something strange in the distance. His eyes narrow as he spots the limping figure of the German Shepherd again, just off to the side of the highway. The dog looks even worse than before. Weaker, slower, and more broken. But there's something in its eyes that makes him hesitate. The dog's gaze locks with his, and the connection between them is almost immediate. It's as if the dog knows that help is near, but it's unsure whether to trust it. The man, feeling the weight of the dog's pain, makes a quick decision. He pulls the car to the side of the road, carefully guiding it to a stop. His wife, who had been reading on her phone, looks up with a surprised glance. "What are you doing?" she asks, her voice laced with concern. "I think it's hurt," the man replies, his voice soft, yet resolute. "I can't just leave it out here." He opens the car door, stepping out onto the road, his footsteps slow and measured as he approaches the German Shepherd. The dog, sensing his presence, lifts its head, its eyes still wide with fear and pain. But something shifts in its gaze as the man comes closer. It doesn't retreat. Instead, it watches, waiting, as if to see what this stranger will do. Lily stirs in her seat, waking up to the sound of the car door closing. Her small face appears at the window, and for a brief moment, she watches her father interact with the dog. She coos softly, her tiny hand reaching out to the window once again, her fingers stretching toward the dog as if calling it to come closer. The dog, despite its fear, limps forward, the pain in its steps too much to bear. The man kneels down beside the dog, offering his hand in a gesture of compassion. The dog looks at him, its golden eyes filled with a mixture of distrust and longing. Lily's tiny hand continues to reach for the dog, and something in the animal stirs. Slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, the dog lowers its head and gently nuzzles the side of the car door, its wary body leaning against it. It's a moment of pure vulnerability, a silent request for help, for connection, and for love. The man hesitates for a moment, and then, with a soft sigh, he reaches out to gently pat the dog's head. "You're safe now," he murmurs, and in that moment, a quiet promise is made. Lily watches, her eyes wide, the bond between her and the dog silently growing, unseen but deeply felt. The dog, once broken and lost, now finds a sliver of hope in the human's touch. The bond between them has begun in earnest, one of survival, of compassion, and of love. But the journey is just beginning. The dog is still far from safe, and the path ahead will be filled with moments of fear, pain, and sacrifice. Yet, through it all, the dog and the baby will be there for each other, their connection growing deeper with every challenge they face together. The days that followed the rescue were filled with a quiet but determined effort. The German Shepherd, whom they had named Max, was a far cry from the strong, confident dog he once was. His body, though muscular and proud in appearance, now bore the marks of an ordeal that left him scarred both inside and out. His limbs, though still capable of movement, were weak from the pain of his injuries, and his once shining coat was dull, matted, and covered in dirt. He moved slowly around the house, hesitant and wary, as if he didn't quite trust his new surroundings. Lily, on the other hand, had adapted quickly to the presence of the dog. Her curious little hands often reached out toward Max, and her giggles filled the air whenever he wandered near her crib. Max, sensing the innocence in the baby, would pause every time she reached for him, his golden eyes softening with a tenderness that had long been absent from his heart. There was something in Lily's gaze, a purity, an innocence, that seemed to heal him in ways that nothing else could. Despite their growing connection, Max was not entirely comfortable yet. He had been through too much, experienced too much loss, and was still haunted by the fear that any moment of peace could be shattered. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside, set him on edge. He would tense, his ears flicking forward as if waiting for the next threat to emerge. The sense of danger, of unpredictability, lingered like a shadow over him, clouding his every step. Lily's family tried to create a sense of normalcy for Max. The father, seeing the dog's unease, would sit beside him on the couch each evening, gently petting his fur. "It's all right, Max," he'd say in a soft voice. "You're safe here." But Max wasn't so sure. His body language said it all. His tail remained low. His movements were slow, and his eyes darted to the door whenever someone knocked. Still, there was something unspoken between them, a growing trust that lingered in the quiet moments when Max would settle down near Lily's crib and watch her sleep peacefully. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the family gathered around the dinner table. The father was explaining their plans to take a road trip in a few weeks. "Well, take Lily to see her grandparents?" he said with a smile. The mother nodded in agreement, her attention on Lily, who was reaching for her food with all the enthusiasm a toddler could muster. Meanwhile, Max lay curled up near the door, watching the family with cautious eyes, his gaze softening only when Lily's laughter filled the room. But outside, the world was different. The highway, once a place of danger for Max, now felt like a distant memory, a haunting place where he had been abandoned, lost, and alone. The house, though warm and filled with love, was still a place he didn't quite belong to. The quiet hum of the house did little to comfort him, and he found himself growing restless as the days passed. The danger that lingered in his memories seemed to follow him, even in this safe haven. That evening, after dinner, the family decided to take a short walk around the neighborhood, hoping that the fresh air would calm their nerves. Lily was tucked safely in her stroller, wrapped in a warm blanket, her little face glowing with the joy of a new adventure. Max, though hesitant at first, was coaxed outside, his leash attached to his collar. He stood on the front porch for a moment, his eyes flicking to the street and the distant trees. It was as if he was remembering something that told him that this peaceful moment might not last. The family began to walk down the quiet street, the air crisp with the coolness of early evening. The light from the street lamps bathed the sidewalk in a soft, golden hue, and the world around them felt calm, serene. Max walked slowly, his head held low, his eyes scanning the environment. He walked alongside Lily's stroller, a silent protector, ever watchful, ever alert. The baby's giggles filled the air, and Max's tail wagged slowly in response to her joy. He seemed to soften, just a little, as the warmth of the family's love washed over him. But the peace was short-lived. As they reached the end of the street, the sound of a car engine revving broke through the quiet night. Max's ears pricked up immediately. His body stiffened, his muscles tensing as the vehicle sped down the road. The car's headlights illuminated the street, and the low hum of the engine vibrated in the air. Max's gaze locked onto the car, and his body went rigid. His instinct to protect Lily flared up, and without warning, he lunged forward, pulling the leash taut as he raced toward the edge of the sidewalk. "Max!" The father's voice called out, but it was too late. In a flash, Max was in the street, his body moving with a strength and speed that belied his injuries. The car, a dark blur, was approaching quickly. The father shouted once more, but Max didn't stop. His instincts had taken over, the protective drive pushing him forward with all his might. The car swerved suddenly, its tires screeching as it narrowly avoided hitting Max. Max skidded to a stop just inches from the curb, his breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. His heart raced, his body trembling from the effort. The car, now a distant shadow in the night, continued down the road, oblivious to the near tragedy that had just unfolded. The father, his face pale with shock, rushed to Max's side, kneeling down to check on him. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice trembling. Max panted, his chest heaving with the exertion. His eyes were wide, filled with the remnants of fear. But there was something else in those eyes now, a deeper understanding of his purpose. He had protected Lily. He had saved her. Lily, who had been startled by the sudden commotion, was crying softly in her stroller. The mother rushed to calm her, her voice soothing as she picked up the baby. Max, still panting, turned toward Lily's cries and immediately trotted over to her, his head lowered as if to apologize for the scare. The baby's tears slowly subsided as she reached out for him, her tiny fingers brushing against his fur. In that moment, the bond between them deepened. Max had proven, not just to the family, but to himself that he was willing to sacrifice anything to keep them safe. The danger that had haunted him on the highway was now a thing of the past. His role in this family was no longer just as a survivor, but as a protector, a guardian, and a friend. As the family made their way back home, the father kept a steady hand on Max's leash, his heart swelling with pride. He knew that the dog had come a long way since that first, fearful encounter on the road. Max had proven himself in ways no one had expected. With courage, with loyalty, and with a love that knew no bounds. The bond between the baby and the dog had become more than just a connection. It was a lifeline, forged in the fires of fear, love, and sacrifice. That night, as they returned to the safety of their home, Max lay down near Lily's crib. His body relaxed for the first time in days. The family settled in for the night, the warmth of their togetherness a shield against the fears of the past. Max had found his place in the world, not just as a survivor, but as a protector of the most precious thing in his life, the baby who had reached out to him with pure innocence and love. The journey ahead would be long, filled with challenges and obstacles, but for now, in this quiet moment, Max could finally rest. He had found his purpose, and he knew that no matter what came next, he would face it with the same courage that had saved the family that night. And for Lily, the journey of love and rescue had only just begun. The days that followed Max's heroic act were marked by a strange tranquility. The family, still processing the raw emotions of that night, had settled into a routine. But for Max, the previous incident weighed heavily on his mind. While he had instinctively protected Lily from danger, his internal battle was far from over. Every time a car drove by or a strange noise echoed through the house, he would flinch, as if waiting for the world to collapse again. Lily's parents, though proud of Max's protective instincts, knew that the dog still had a long way to go in terms of healing, both physically and emotionally. He was a creature of immense strength, but his past had left deep scars. The time he spent alone, wandering the streets in search of food and shelter, was a ghost that lingered in his every move. Yet there was hope in the way he slowly began to trust them. The flickers of tenderness, the moments of calm when he rested near Lily's crib, signaled that healing had begun. Still, there was a long road ahead, one that would demand more than just time. It was a sunny Saturday morning when the opportunity for real change arrived. The father had planned a trip to the nearby park, a place where the family could enjoy a quiet day out in nature. It was an easy decision. Lily needed fresh air, and Max, though hesitant at first, seemed to be adjusting to the idea of spending time outside. Perhaps the open space would offer him the sense of freedom he hadn't known in a long time. The father, hopeful that a change of scenery might ease the lingering tension, suggested they take Max for a walk by the lake. As the family gathered in the car, Lily's father looked at Max, his heart swelling with the knowledge of what the dog had already done for them. "You've earned this, buddy," he whispered, gently patting Max's head as the dog sat next to him in the backseat. "Let's go, and just enjoy a quiet day." The journey to the park was peaceful, with the occasional chirp of birds in the distance and the rustling of leaves as the car sped along the highway. Max sat quietly, his head resting on the seat, his body tense but not as rigid as it had been. Lily, babbling softly in her car seat, provided a calming backdrop to the otherwise serene drive. The father smiled to himself, his fingers gripping the steering wheel as the landscape passed by in a blur of green and blue. When they arrived at the park, the open expanse of grass and the soft scent of the lake air seemed to invite them in. The large oak trees that lined the perimeter offered shade, and the sun's warmth bathed everything in a golden glow. Lily, her face full of wonder, was quickly unstrapped from her car seat, her tiny legs kicking with excitement. The family made their way to the walking path that wound around the lake, the sound of the water lapping against the shore providing a gentle rhythm to the afternoon. Max, still hesitant, lagged behind, sniffing the air, his ears alert for any unfamiliar sounds. He wasn't used to the openness of nature, and the quiet was both soothing and unsettling. But as the family walked ahead, Max's instincts began to guide him. He watched Lily, who was already mesmerized by the ducks swimming in the lake, and something deep inside him shifted. She was so small, so vulnerable, but her presence filled the air with a peacefulness that he hadn't felt in years. He trotted slowly, his steps tentative but purposeful, until he finally reached her side. Lily, upon noticing the dog, giggled and reached out her small hand, her fingers touching the soft fur of his coat. Max stopped and lowered his head, allowing her to stroke his fur. The touch was gentle, untainted by fear or hesitance. It was as if Lily had the power to soothe the deep ache within him without even trying. She laughed again, her tiny voice pure and full of innocence. In that moment, Max felt something he hadn't felt in so long, a sense of belonging. There was no fear here, no shadows from his past haunting his every step. There was only the warmth of the sun on his back, the sound of Lily's laughter, and the steady presence of her family. The father, noticing the bond between the two, smiled. He could see the transformation in Max. This wasn't just a dog that had been saved from the streets. This was a dog that had found a new purpose, a new life. It wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about love, about the quiet moments that meant more than any grand gesture. But as they continued their walk, something in the air shifted. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and stirring the water. Max's head snapped up, his ears twitching. The family didn't notice at first, lost in their own conversation and the peacefulness of the park. But Max's instincts were sharp. He was no longer just a scared, broken animal. He was a protector, and his senses were honed. A distant sound reached his ears, the faintest hint of a growl. His body stiffened, and his eyes narrowed as he scanned the surroundings. It wasn't another animal, at least not one that posed an immediate threat, but it was something else. A human voice, far off, calling out. The father turned to Max, who was already on alert, staring intently at a group of people gathered near the lake. "What's wrong, boy?" the father asked, his voice calm but cautious. Max's low growl rumbled in his throat. It wasn't a threatening sound, but one of warning, a deep instinctive recognition of something amiss. The family stopped, their footsteps slowing as they tried to make sense of Max's behavior. They looked toward the gathering by the lake, where a couple of children were playing near the water. But there was something strange about the situation. One of the children had wandered too close to the edge, his attention distracted by a small toy floating in the water. He had stepped too far, the slippery ground beneath him threatening to give way. Max's growl grew louder. Without hesitation, he darted forward, his body moving with a speed that was shocking for such an injured creature. The family watched in awe as Max, with unspoken intent, charged toward the child. The boy, unaware of the danger, continued to inch closer to the edge of the lake. In a flash, Max was there. He lunged forward, gripping the boy's coat in his mouth, pulling him back from the brink of the water. The child, startled by the sudden action, cried out in fear as Max gently but firmly tugged him away from the edge. Max's strength and quick reflexes had saved the child from falling in. The father, wide-eyed and speechless, rushed over to the scene. "Is he okay?" he asked, checking on the boy, who was now crying but unharmed. The child's mother, who had been distracted for a moment, arrived just in time to see Max's heroic act. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaky with relief. "He could have fallen in if it weren't for your dog." Max stood back, his body tense but his eyes softening as the boy's cries quieted. The boy, now safe, looked up at Max with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Good dog," he said, his voice trembling. Lily, who had been watching the scene unfold from her stroller, giggled, clapping her hands. Max, sensing her happiness, wagged his tail slowly, his body relaxing for the first time that day. The father reached down to pat Max's head. "You did it again," he murmured, his voice filled with pride. The family spent the rest of the afternoon in the park, their day forever marked by the quiet heroism of the dog, who had become not just a protector of their home, but a guardian of the entire family. The bond between Max and Lily had grown even stronger that day, solidified by an act of selflessness and courage. As the sun set and the family made their way home, Max walked beside them, his steps sure and steady. He had found his place, not just in the family, but in the world. He was no longer the broken animal of his past. He was a hero, a protector, and a friend. And with Lily by his side, Max knew that the journey of love and rescue had only just begun. The quiet moments that followed Max's brave rescue, had a profound effect on the family. The love and respect they felt for him had grown tenfold, as had their appreciation for the bond that had formed between him and Lily. However, despite Max's heroic actions, the dog's journey toward emotional and physical healing was far from over. Max, once a proud and confident German shepherd, was still a wounded soul, both physically and emotionally. The scars on his body were visible, though they were slowly healing with the help of the vet. His limping gait, though less pronounced, still held the remnants of the trauma he'd experienced. The gash along his side had begun to close, but the emotional wounds ran deeper, hidden from view. Lily's parents understood that healing wasn't just about physical recovery. The traumatic memories of the streets, the coldness of survival, and the fear of abandonment were shadows that Max carried within him. It wasn't enough to simply provide food and shelter. He needed to learn how to trust again, to find peace in a world that had once been so unkind to him. The healing process began slowly, in small moments that made all the difference. The mornings were always peaceful, a calm before the storm of the day's activities. Max had grown accustomed to the soft, early morning light streaming into the living room. It was here, sitting by the window, that Max first began to relax. The gentle sounds of birds chirping in the trees, the distant hum of passing cars, and the laughter of Lily playing nearby all seemed to create a harmonious atmosphere that invited stillness. Max, who had once been so on edge, now found himself resting more comfortably in these peaceful moments. His eyes, once wide with anxiety, began to soften as he lay beside Lily's crib while she played with her toys. There was a strange comfort in this new routine. A routine where, instead of running from his past, Max could finally face it with the warmth of his new family. Lily, now 6 months old, was becoming more curious about the world around her. She was learning to sit up on her own, her small hands reaching for the colorful toys that cluttered the floor. Max, ever the silent guardian, watched over her, always close by. Every time she reached out to him, Max would nudge her gently with his nose, a small gesture of reassurance. Though Lily couldn't yet speak, her eyes and her smile conveyed an undeniable connection to Max. She would giggle when he nudged her, her tiny hands grasping at his fur with innocent delight. Max's tail would wag slowly, as if content in the knowledge that he was there to protect her, just as he had done when the child was in danger at the park. The mother, noticing this growing bond, couldn't help but smile as she watched the two of them interact. It had become their unspoken routine. Lily would play, and Max would observe, always ready to offer his comforting presence when needed. The baby's giggles and laughter filled the room with warmth, and Max, ever vigilant, was the silent witness to her happiness. But it wasn't just about Lily and Max. The entire family began to feel the effects of this newfound bond. One evening, after dinner, the family decided to spend some time in the backyard. It was an unspoken tradition that had formed naturally over the past few weeks. A time when everyone, including Max, could unwind. The weather was warm, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Lily, in her high chair, giggled as she watched her father toss a small ball across the yard, her eyes lighting up with each new movement. Max, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, suddenly perked up. The ball, which had rolled into the grass, was an intriguing sight for him. For a moment, Max hesitated. His eyes darted between the ball and Lily. Then, as if guided by instinct, he trotted over to the ball, gently nudging it with his nose. The ball rolled a little further, and Max followed it, his tail wagging in excitement. It was the first time in months that Max had displayed any hint of playful behavior. Lily's father, who had been watching Max, smiled. "Well, would you look at that? He's playing," he said to his wife, his voice filled with quiet awe. Max's playful behavior was a breakthrough, a sign that the dog was beginning to let go of the darkness of his past. It was as if he had found a moment of joy in the simple act of chasing a ball across the yard. The dog who had once been lost in a world of fear and survival was now reconnecting with something as simple as play. It was a reminder that healing wasn't just about overcoming the past, but also about rediscovering the joy of being alive. For the first time, Max seemed truly present in the moment, no longer burdened by the shadows of his former life. He was here, with his new family, and he was learning how to be a dog again. Over the next few weeks, the family continued their routine, taking short walks around the neighborhood and spending more time in the backyard. Max, though still cautious at times, had begun to adjust to his new life. His fears didn't vanish overnight, but they were gradually replaced by moments of trust and connection. He no longer flinched at every passing car, and while he still kept a watchful eye on his surroundings, he was no longer ruled by anxiety. One afternoon, Lily's mother decided to take Max and Lily to the local pet store to get some supplies. It was a simple outing, but it marked another significant milestone in Max's recovery. The store, filled with the sounds of other animals and the bustle of customers, could have easily overwhelmed him. But as soon as they entered, Max's demeanor was calm, his body relaxed beside Lily's stroller. The familiar sights and smells didn't faze him as they had before. Instead, he trotted alongside Lily, his pace steady and unhurried. Lily's mother looked down at him and smiled. "You've come a long way, Max," she whispered. It was a small moment, but one that carried with it the weight of all the progress they had made as a family. At the pet store, they were greeted by the store owner, a woman who had heard about Max's story. "I'm so glad to see him doing well," she said, kneeling down to give Max a scratch behind the ears. Max, now accustomed to kind gestures, accepted her affection with a wag of his tail. As they made their way through the aisles, Lily's mother couldn't help but notice the change in Max. He had gone from being a dog that flinched at the slightest sound to one that confidently moved through the world. He was becoming a member of their family in the truest sense. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the family gathered in the living room. Max lay peacefully at Lily's feet, his body stretched out and relaxed. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated his coat, casting a golden hue across the room. Lily, now a little older and more aware of the world around her, reached out to touch Max's fur once again. This time, when she touched him, it was with a sense of wonder and admiration. Max, who had once been a shadow of his former self, was now a living, breathing testament to the power of healing. His journey, though long and difficult, had brought him here, to this place of peace, love, and growth. He was no longer the dog that had wandered the streets alone. He was now a member of a family that cared for him, protected him, and most importantly, loved him. And as Lily's tiny fingers brushed against his fur, Max felt something deep within him shift. The healing wasn't just for him. It was for all of them. He had found a home, and in that home, he had found peace. The days following Max's adjustment into the family's life felt like a new beginning. His progress was clear, his strength returning, and his bond with Lily growing deeper each day. However, despite the joy and peace that surrounded him now, there remained the shadows of his past, lingering quietly beneath the surface. Max had started to play to trust, and to become the protector the family had come to know him as. He had even begun to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, once more walking in the park, chasing after Lily's toys, and curling up at the foot of her crib. But in the stillness of the night, when the family was asleep, the past would come flooding back. Memories of hunger, fear, and pain would haunt him in the quiet of the house. And those fears didn't just reside in Max's mind. They often echoed through his actions. It had been one of those late nights when Max's fears resurfaced. The house was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves outside the window and the soft breathing of the family. Max lay on his bed by the door, but something was wrong. His body tensed, his ears flicking as a distant sound reached him. A faint squeak of a door, a shift in the air, or perhaps the faintest whiff of unfamiliar scent. Whatever it was, it sent his body into immediate alert. For a moment, Max lay perfectly still, his breathing shallow. His sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the shapes and shadows, the quiet comfort of the night that once had soothed him, now unsettling him with each passing second. His gaze flickered to Lily's crib. There she was, tucked in, her tiny hands resting above the covers, her breath soft and even. Max watched her for a moment, reassured by her peacefulness, but the discomfort in his chest remained. He couldn't ignore the primal urge that had once ruled his existence. It was an instinct, a call for vigilance. Suddenly, a car passed by on the street outside, its headlights casting long shadows through the curtains. The blinding light caused Max's muscles to tighten. He felt his pulse quicken. His heart raced with anxiety, his body unwilling to let go of the instinct that had kept him alive for so long. The instinct to survive. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to protect, to be ready, to do what he had done so many times before. But this time, he wasn't alone. This time, he had something to protect. Lily's cries pierced the stillness of the night, and Max's attention snapped toward her crib. He shot up from his resting place, his paws scrambling against the floor. The baby's cries were loud, a mix of discomfort and confusion. Max's body moved before his mind could catch up, instinctively leaping into action. He padded over to Lily's crib, his large body brushing against the edges of the furniture. Lily's mother rushed in, her face filled with concern, but it was clear she was unaware of the source of Lily's distress. She scooped the baby up, her voice soft as she tried to comfort her.
"Shh, it's okay, baby,"
she murmured. "Mommy's here?" Max stood nearby, panting heavily, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the threat that only he could sense. His body trembled slightly, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the overwhelming need to protect, to shield Lily from whatever danger he thought was near. Lily's cries began to subside as her mother rocked her gently in her arms. The soft, swaddling blanket, wrapped around the baby's tiny body, provided comfort, and soon the room quieted once more. Max remained at the edge of the crib, watching, his eyes fixed on the baby in a mixture of worry and protectiveness. The tension in his body didn't ease, though. It lingered, a persistent, gnawing discomfort. Lily's mother, noticing Max's unusual agitation, slowly stood up and walked over to him, her hand outstretched. "Max, you did a good job," she whispered, kneeling to his level. "You're here for her, aren't you?" Max's body relaxed just slightly, his tail wagging a little, but his mind remained unsettled. He had done what he had been trained to do, what he had always done in moments of danger. He had guarded the baby, and yet, his body still trembled with the remnants of fear. The incident wasn't over, but the fear had dissipated for now. Max lay back down, but the unease remained in the air, like a faint echo that refused to fade. The following days were marked by a lingering tension in Max. While Lily's parents tried to maintain their routine and enjoy the moments of peace, Max could sense the subtle changes in the house. Lily's laughter had returned, but Max's joy was tainted by the unease that plagued him. His attention was heightened in every room, every corner of the house. If a door creaked, if a neighbor's dog barked too loudly, Max would freeze. His deep, protective instincts pulled him into a state of constant vigilance. One morning, Lily's father noticed Max's behavior during their usual morning walk. The dog had become unusually distant. He would sniff the air, his head darting to and fro, eyes scanning the horizon, as if the world was full of invisible threats. He would sometimes stop mid-step, his body tense, staring at nothing in particular. Lily's father, concerned but not entirely understanding the depth of Max's struggles, crouched down to the dog's level. "Max," he called gently, his voice filled with concern. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe here?" But the words, though comforting, did little to ease Max's fears. His mind was still trapped in the endless loop of survival. His past was a cage that he couldn't escape, and every sound, every unfamiliar scent, felt like the echoes of his former life, one filled with uncertainty, loss, and the constant threat of danger. Lily, still in her stroller, let out a soft laugh as she tugged on her father's sleeve, pointing toward a butterfly fluttering by. The sight of her innocent joy seemed to break through the fog of Max's anxiety, if only for a moment. He looked at her, his golden eyes softening. There was something in her laughter, something so pure and untainted by fear, that grounded him. She was his anchor, his reason to stay grounded. Max's tail gave a slight wag, and he trotted alongside the stroller, though his body remained alert. He wasn't quite at ease yet, but in that moment, he was at least willing to try. That evening, after the walk, the family sat together in the living room, each of them unwinding from the day's events. Lily's mother had put her to bed, and the house was quieter than it had been in weeks. Max lay at the foot of Lily's crib, his large form stretched out, but still restless. His mind was always a few steps ahead, always wondering when the next danger would appear. Lily's father, sensing the dog's unease, approached him and knelt down. He gently stroked Max's fur, his hand warm against the dog's body. "It's okay, Max," he whispered. "You don't have to be on guard all the time, you've done enough. We're here. You're home now." Max, though still vigilant, rested his head on the floor, eyes half closed. He was beginning to understand. Slowly, he was learning to let go of the constant need to protect. It was a long, difficult process, but the more moments like this he experienced, the more he realized that the world was different now. He was no longer the stray dog on the street, constantly in fear. He was part of a family that loved him. But the echoes of his fear would not disappear overnight. They would remain in the quiet moments, in the flicker of the streetlights outside, in the soft sounds of nighttime, reminders that healing took time. Max would need to confront these fears, face them head on, and learn to trust the safety and love he had found. As Max closed his eyes, the weight of his past still pressing on his chest, he knew that the journey wasn't over. But for the first time, he allowed himself to rest. In this moment, he could trust that Lily and her family would be there, that he would protect them and they, in turn, would protect him. And so, in the stillness of the night, Max drifted into a peaceful sleep, the echoes of fear slowly fading into the distance, replaced by the quiet certainty of a home that he could finally call his own. The peace that had settled in the house was fragile, like a delicate glass ornament, beautiful but easily shattered. While Max had made incredible strides in adjusting to his new life with Lily and her parents, the shadows of his past still lingered, hidden in the corners of his mind. His fears, though less frequent, would resurface unexpectedly, catching him off guard and testing the limits of his newfound trust. Max's instincts were sharp, and his sense of safety, once compromised by the trauma of the streets, was always on edge. He could sense when something wasn't right, even when there was no obvious threat. And it was during one quiet, starless night that these shadows, the ghosts of his past, would come rushing back. It started with a soft creak from downstairs, barely audible but enough to cause Max's ears to snap upright. His body immediately tensed, his muscles stiffening as he sat up on his bed by the door. His tail, once relaxed, now stiffened as he waited, his eyes scanning the darkened hallway outside. The sound was followed by another, a faint scrape against the floorboards. Max's heart began to race, and for a moment, it felt as though he was back on the streets, lost, alone, and hunted. Lily's room was quiet. The baby slept soundly, her soft breath rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. Her innocence, that ever-present source of comfort, was unaware of the tension creeping through the house. But Max was alert, his body fully awake and ready for anything. Another noise. A door, slightly ajar, creaked open. The faint scent of something unfamiliar lingered in the air. Max's breath quickened. His instincts screamed at him. There was danger. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel it. The walls felt thinner, the air heavier. He got up slowly, his paws light on the hardwood floor as he padded silently down the hallway. The shadows seemed to move with him, stretching long and eerie in the dim light from the window. Every small sound, the rustling of the leaves outside, the ticking of the clock in the living room, seemed amplified in the silence of the night. Max's heart thudded in his chest, each beat resonating through his body, pushing him forward. When he reached the top of the stairs, he froze. Down below, in the faintest sliver of light coming from the kitchen, he saw a figure. A shadow, barely distinguishable, moving across the floor. It was a human figure. But it was wrong. A silhouette that didn't belong. Max's hackles rose, and his body was consumed with the urge to protect. Lily. Max's eyes darted toward her room. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for him to see her sleeping peacefully in her crib. The figure, whatever it was, didn't seem to be moving toward her. But the threat was real, and his protective instincts surged forward, like a wave crashing against the shore. Without thinking, Max descended the stairs, his claws clicking softly against the wood. The figure in the kitchen moved again, this time toward the back door. The sudden motion pushed Max into action. He sprang forward, his movements swift and purposeful, reaching the kitchen in a matter of seconds. As he rounded the corner, the figure turned, and the moment of clarity came. It was not an intruder, not a shadow, not a threat at all. It was the mother, moving quietly in the night. She had gotten up to check on something in the kitchen. Maybe a glass of water, or the faint sound of the fridge door creaking. Max's tense body relaxed all at once, the immediate fear fading into a mix of embarrassment and relief. He stood there, panting heavily, his heart still racing. The mother, startled by his sudden appearance, froze for a moment before letting out a small chuckle. "Max," she whispered softly, kneeling down to his level. "What's the matter, boy? You scared me." Max sat down slowly, his tail twitching nervously. His eyes never left her, his body still ready to spring into action, though he now realized the danger was non-existent. He had acted out of instinct, but in his confusion, he had mistaken the sound of her quiet movements for something far worse. The shadows in his mind had distorted the reality of the situation, and the fear had taken hold once again. The mother reached out to stroke his head gently. "You're just trying to protect us, aren't you? But there's no danger. It's just me." Max's ears drooped slightly, his eyes softening in understanding. He was being too vigilant, too reactive. The danger he feared wasn't real. He was home now, safe with his family. But the shadow of fear, a legacy of his time on the streets, still clung to him, whispering that he could never let his guard down completely. The mother, sensing his unease, smiled softly. "It's okay, Max. You're safe here. We're all safe." She gently patted his head again, her touch comforting and grounding. Max nuzzled her hand, the tension in his body slowly beginning to ease. She understood him better than anyone else. In a world where everything had once been chaotic, she had become his anchor, his constant in the storm of his past. Later that night, as Max lay back down in his spot by Lily's crib, he tried to calm his racing heart. The house was still again, and the soft sounds of the night filled the air. The moonlight, shining through the window, bathed the room in a silver glow. Max looked at Lily's sleeping form, her tiny hands clutching her blanket, her breathing steady and peaceful. For a moment, Max simply watched her. He thought back to the first time he had laid eyes on her, when she had been just a tiny, innocent child, unaware of the dangers of the world. She had reached out to him without hesitation, her trust so pure, so unconditional. And it was her that had helped him heal, that had brought him home. Max took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling slowly as he settled into the quiet of the room. The shadows that had plagued him seemed to dissipate with each passing night. Slowly but surely, he was learning to trust again. He didn't need to be on guard all the time. He didn't need to let the echoes of his past control his every thought and action. He was safe. He was loved, and he had a family now that would protect him, just as he would protect them. Lily stirred in her crib, turning over in her sleep. Max, ever watchful, stood up and moved closer to her. He lowered his head gently beside her crib, just as he had done so many times before. This was his place, by her side, guarding her sleep, ensuring that she remained safe. And though the darkness of his past would always linger in the corners of his mind, he knew that with each passing day, the light of this new life would chase those shadows away. The fear that had once controlled him, that had once made him question everything, was slowly being replaced by something more powerful. It was a quiet kind of strength, a peace born from the love and trust he had found in this family. Max had faced the shadows, and in doing so, he had found the light. The night stretched on, calm and still, and Max remained by Lily's side, watching over her. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the greatest battles are not fought against the world, but against the fears within ourselves. And in the quiet stillness of the night, Max had finally made peace with his own heart. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time Max felt truly at home. Days had turned into weeks, and Max had begun to settle into a new rhythm. He no longer paced restlessly through the house or froze at the slightest sound. Instead, he had become a constant, unwavering presence in the lives of Lily and her parents. His days were marked by simple moments of joy. A walk in the park, a game of fetch, a quiet evening by the fireplace. And through it all, Max had become more than just a dog. He was their guardian, their protector, and in a way, their teacher, teaching them the value of patience, of love, and of resilience. Max had, over time, learned to trust again. He had learned that safety didn't always have to be a fleeting illusion. That peace, though fragile, could be real. But more than that, he had found something that no one, not even the family, had anticipated: a sense of purpose. The once distrustful and anxious dog had become Lily's watchful guardian, a silent protector, always there when needed most. It was a calm, sunny afternoon when Lily's mother decided to take the family for a picnic by the lake. It had been a while since they had ventured outside, and the weather was perfect. Warm but not too hot, with a soft breeze that rustled through the leaves of the trees. Max had become accustomed to these outings, though he never quite lost his vigilant gaze. It wasn't that he distrusted the world around him, but rather that his instincts never fully allowed him to relax. He was always on the lookout, always aware. It had become second nature to him. The family packed a basket with sandwiches, fruits, and a thermos of lemonade. Lily, who had begun crawling and was on the verge of taking her first steps, was bubbling with excitement. She giggled in her stroller, reaching for the picnic blanket as they set off for the lake. Max walked beside them, his leash loose but his body alert, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. When they reached the lake, the beauty of the scene was undeniable. The water, clear and still, reflected the sky in its surface like a mirror. Birds chirped in the trees, and the sound of the gentle lapping of the water against the shore added to the serenity of the moment. It was the perfect place for a family to enjoy the outdoors, and it seemed like nothing could go wrong. Lily's mother spread out the blanket on the grass, setting the picnic basket on top. Lily, now crawling, was eager to explore the new space. Her tiny hands reached for the grass, her face lighting up with every new discovery. Max, ever the protector, sat nearby, watching her every move, though the world around him seemed calm. He never took his eyes off Lily, his every muscle tensed in readiness, as though guarding her from something only he could sense. Lily's father stood by the water's edge, casting a fishing line into the lake, while Lily's mother sat down on the blanket, taking a moment to relax. Max continued to watch over Lily, his sharp eyes catching every tiny movement she made. The baby, unaware of the tension in the air, was content to explore her surroundings. She pulled herself to her hands and knees, her face a mixture of curiosity and wonder as she picked at the grass, trying to understand this new world. Max remained where he sat, still and alert. His gaze shifted from Lily to her parents, then back again. His job, he thought, was to protect her, to ensure that no harm came to her, even in a peaceful place like this. His role as her guardian was more than just a duty. It was an instinct, ingrained in him from the moment he first met her. His body, once full of anxiety and fear, had learned to settle into this new role. The simple act of keeping watch had become his new purpose, and there was no greater reward than knowing that Lily was safe. But then, something shifted. A sudden gust of wind blew through the trees, and Max's ears perked up. His nose twitched, and his body tensed as an unfamiliar scent reached him. A strange, metallic smell filled the air, and Max's hackles rose. It was faint at first, but then it grew stronger, more pronounced. His eyes darted toward the nearby woods. The calm that had once settled over the scene now felt distant, like the calm before a storm. Max's instincts flared, and his protective nature kicked into overdrive. Lily's mother, noticing Max's sudden change in demeanor, looked up from the picnic basket. "Max, what is it, boy?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. Max was already on his feet, his body moving with purpose. He turned his head toward Lily, who was now reaching for a stray leaf blowing by. The wind had shifted, and the scent was stronger now. Something wasn't right. Max padded quickly toward Lily, his body poised to act. "Mummy?" Lily's voice rang out suddenly, and she let out a small cry as a loud rustling noise came from the woods. Max, without hesitation, moved in front of her, his body blocking the path between her and whatever was coming. He stood tall, his posture fierce and protective. His gaze locked onto the woods, his growl low but steady in his throat. Lily's mother stood up quickly, her heart racing. "What's going on, Max?" she asked, her voice trembling. Max didn't move, his focus unbroken. He was watching something, waiting for it to appear. The rustling sound came closer, and then, from the edge of the trees, a figure emerged. It wasn't a person but a wild animal. A large, stray dog that had wandered into the area. It wasn't threatening in appearance, but Max's body remained tense, every muscle coiled. The stray dog, who had been rummaging through the nearby bushes, paused as it noticed Max. The two dogs locked eyes for a moment, a silent challenge passing between them. Lily's father, sensing the tension, hurried over to the group. "Is everything okay?" he asked, looking between the dogs. Max stood his ground, his body low, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. He wasn't sure if the stray dog posed a threat, but his instincts told him to be ready. The wild dog, sensing Max's protective stance, hesitated, its body unsure. It was a standoff, both dogs silently sizing each other up, the air thick with tension. Lily, still oblivious to the potential danger, stretched out her tiny hand toward the stray dog, her giggle ringing out across the clearing. Her innocence and trust were boundless, and for a moment, it seemed as though the situation might calm down. But Max wasn't about to let his guard down. He stepped in front of Lily, his body shielding her from the dog, his growl intensifying. Lily's mother, now fully aware of the situation, moved toward her daughter, pulling her back into her arms. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered softly, trying to soothe the baby. Max, his body still on edge, looked back at Lily, his protective gaze never leaving her. The stray dog, after a tense moment, finally backed away, sensing that this was not a situation it could win. It turned and slinked back into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. Max watched the area for a few more moments, his posture still rigid, before slowly relaxing. The immediate danger had passed, but the watchful guardian in him remained. Lily's mother crouched down, her hand resting gently on Max's head. "Good boy, Max," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. Max leaned into her touch, his tail slowly beginning to wag. He had protected his family once again. And though the danger had been minimal, the act of protecting had reaffirmed his place in their world. Lily's father, who had been standing nearby, approached them, his eyes filled with a mix of awe and concern. "You're always looking out for us, aren't you, Max?" he said, reaching out to pat the dog's side. "You've earned your place in this family." Max looked up at him, his golden eyes softening as if to say, "This is what I was born to do." And so, as the family resumed their picnic, Max lay down beside them, his eyes never straying far from Lily. The shadows in his mind had lessened with each passing day, but they were still there, lurking in the corners of his thoughts. The protective instincts that had once driven him to distrust everything around him, now made him the most reliable guardian Lily could ever have. The bond between them, the bond of love, loyalty, and trust, had become something unbreakable. Max, the once anxious and fearful dog, had found his place in the world, and in that place, he had found peace. With Lily by his side, he knew that no matter what shadows might try to creep back into his mind, he would always stand guard, ever watchful, ever loyal, and forever their protector. The days had passed in a rhythmic flow, like the steady ticking of a clock. Max had found his place within the family. A protector, a friend, a silent guardian of Lily's world. He no longer recoiled from every unfamiliar sound or sudden movement. He had, over time, learned to trust the safety of his new life, but deep within him, something still stirred. Max's past, the days spent wandering the streets, struggling to survive, was always there, lurking in the shadows of his mind. Though he had come to understand that he was safe now, the fear that once gripped him so tightly would sometimes return, unexpected and overpowering. It was during one of these moments, when the storm of his inner turmoil would rise, that Max would be forced to confront the lingering darkness that still held him captive. It began on a cloudy afternoon, when the air was thick with the promise of rain. The sky was overcast, casting the world in a muted gray. Max had become accustomed to the occasional storm, but something about the heaviness of the air, the stillness before the downpour, unsettled him. His body tensed as he sat by the window, watching the wind stir the branches of the trees outside. The silence in the house felt different that day. Thicker, more oppressive. Lily's mother, noticing Max's sudden unease, watched him with a concerned expression. She had become familiar with his behavior over the past few weeks. There were moments when Max would act as though everything was fine, but she could tell when something troubled him. It wasn't just the storm, It was as though he was sensing something within himself that he couldn't escape. Max's tail, usually relaxed in these quiet moments, was tucked low between his legs, and his eyes darted nervously from the window to the door. The sound of the wind howling outside, the occasional crack of thunder in the distance, made his ears perk up, his body rigid with tension. Max! Lily's mother whispered softly, crouching down beside him. She reached out to stroke his fur, trying to calm him, but Max pulled away slightly, his focus unwavering. The storm outside continued to build, and the first few drops of rain began to fall against the window. Max let out a low growl, his body stiffening. He wasn't just reacting to the sound of the storm. It was something deeper. Something from his past that had resurfaced. Something he couldn't shake. Lily, who had been playing with her toys on the floor, looked up at Max, sensing the change in the air. She crawled toward him, her tiny hands reaching for his fur, her eyes wide with innocent concern. Max, despite the storm brewing within him, turned his head to look at her. His golden eyes softened for a moment as he took in her presence. Lily's small fingers brushed against his coat, and for a brief moment, Max's body relaxed. The touch of her hand, the softness of her innocent gaze, calmed him. But the moment was fleeting. As the storm outside grew stronger, the wind howling louder, Max's fears began to spiral. His muscles tensed, and he began to pace around the room, his footsteps heavy and restless. He was trapped in his own mind, struggling to break free from the memories that threatened to overwhelm him. The sound of the storm was no longer just a natural phenomenon. It had become a trigger, pulling him back to the days when every gust of wind felt like a threat, and every raindrop was a reminder of his loneliness. Lily's mother stood up slowly, watching Max's erratic movements. She knew something was wrong. She knew this wasn't just about the storm. This was about something much deeper, something Max had yet to fully overcome. She walked over to the window, peering out at the darkening sky. The storm was now in full force, the rain pouring down in sheets, the wind howling as if trying to tear the world apart. She turned back to Max, her voice soft but steady. Max, it's just the storm. You're safe here. You don't need to worry. Max, however, was no longer listening. His body was on high alert, his growls low and constant. He was no longer the calm, protective dog he had been just moments before. In his mind, the world was a dangerous place again. The storm outside had triggered something deep within him. A fear so ingrained in his soul that it could not be silenced by reason or reassurance. Lily's mother took a deep breath, walking toward Max. She knelt beside him, her hand gently reaching for his head. Max, she said, her voice firm but soothing. You're safe. This isn't like the streets. This isn't like before. You're home now. Max paused for a moment, his eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of recognition in his gaze, a momentary flash of understanding. But the storm inside him raged on, louder now, drowning out the calmness of her voice. In that moment, Lily's father entered the room. He immediately noticed the tension in the air. What's going on? He asked, his voice filled with concern as he saw Max pacing nervously around the room. It's the storm, Lily's mother replied, her voice trembling. It's more than that, though. He's been like this ever since the storm started. Lily's father walked over to Max, kneeling beside him. Hey, buddy, he said softly, his voice filled with warmth. It's just a storm. You've been through worse. You're safe here. Max, still restless, didn't seem to hear him. His body was tight with anxiety, his growl growing louder. The sound of thunder shook the windows, and Max flinched as if struck by a physical blow. His once calm eyes were now wide with fear, his breathing shallow and quick. Lily's mother looked at her husband, her eyes filled with helplessness. He doesn't understand. It's like he's reliving everything all over again. Lily's father nodded, his expression pained. He's not just afraid of the storm. He's afraid of something more. Something from before. The storm outside continued to howl, its winds rattling the windows and its thunder shaking the walls. The world outside felt like it was unraveling, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. One that neither Max nor the family could control. Max's growls turned into frantic barks, his pacing increasing in intensity. His body was shaking now, his nerves frayed, his mind trapped in the chaos of his past. Lily, sensing the distress in the room, let out a soft cry from her crib. Her innocent voice cut through the tension like a knife, bringing Max's attention back to her. She was frightened too, her tiny hands reaching out toward him. Max paused, his golden eyes meeting Lily's. For a moment, the storm inside him slowed. The sight of Lily, her vulnerability, her trust, reached deep into him, pulling him back from the brink. Lily's father stood up, his voice calm and steady. "Max, look at her. Look at Lily. She needs you." And Max's body trembled as he turned toward the crib, his focus shifting. Lily's tiny hands reached out to him, her face a picture of concern. Her soft coos were a balm to his fractured soul, a reminder of the love that had saved him. Slowly, Max approached the crib, his steps hesitant but purposeful. He lowered his head to Lily's level, nudging her hand gently with his nose. The storm outside still raged, but in this small moment, the storm within him began to quiet. Lily smiled up at him, her tiny fingers grasping at his fur. Max's tail twitched slightly, and he leaned into her touch. For the first time since the storm had started, his breathing slowed. The fear, the chaos, the darkness that had consumed him began to dissipate, replaced by something stronger. The undeniable bond between him and the baby he had sworn to protect. Lily's mother approached them, her eyes soft with understanding. She reached down to stroke Max's fur, her touch gentle and reassuring. "You're okay now, Max. We're all okay." The storm outside continued to rage, but in that moment, it no longer mattered. Max had faced the storm within himself, and though it hadn't completely gone away, he had learned something important. He didn't have to face it alone. Max lay down beside Lily's crib, his body still tense but his spirit calmer. The storm outside may have been fierce, but the love in this room was stronger, and as long as he had Lily by his side, he knew that he could weather any storm, inside or out. The night wore on, the thunder slowly fading into the distance, and Max, the once fearful dog, found peace again. Not in the absence of the storm, but in the unwavering presence of his family. And as he lay beside Lily, watching over her as she slept, he knew that this was his place. Forever their protector, their guardian, and, most importantly, their family. The storms had become less frequent, but Max's anxieties hadn't fully dissipated. The moment when the storm within him would arise was still there, lurking in the background, waiting for an unexpected trigger. But something in the air had shifted again. The days had grown warmer, and the steady rhythm of life in the house seemed to have returned. Until the day when everything changed, and Max's protective instincts would be tested once again. It was an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind of day where everything felt at ease. The sky was clear, the sun shining brightly, and the soft breeze rustling the leaves outside created the perfect soundtrack to an otherwise uneventful day. Lily, now a bit older, had started walking with help, and the family was in the middle of another one of their routine weekend activities. A walk to the nearby park. Lily's father had decided it was time for a family outing, and as usual, Max accompanied them on the walk. His leash was loose, though he stayed close by their side, always watchful. Max had become accustomed to these outings. His guard was always up, but there was a certain comfort in knowing that the family was all together. The walk through the park was peaceful, with Lily's laughter filling the air as she stumbled along beside her parents, holding onto their hands as they guided her. Max trotted ahead, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. He had grown more accustomed to the outdoors, yet the instinct to protect, to watch for any potential danger, was still very much alive in him. He was no longer the anxious dog he had once been. But there was a part of him that never quite let go of the lessons learned in the harshness of his previous life. As they reached the far end of the park, Lily's father pointed toward the swings, his voice excited. "Look, Lily! Do you want to go on the swings?" Lily's eyes lit up as she looked at the swings, eager to try something new. Her parents moved toward the play area, and Max followed at a steady pace, keeping a close watch on everything around them. The park was busy with families, kids running around, and the sound of laughter filling the air. Everything seemed normal, safe. But Max's instincts were sharper than that. The sudden sight of a man walking along the edge of the park, his hands tucked in the pockets of his jacket, made Max's muscles tense. There was nothing outwardly threatening about the man, but there was something about his presence. The way he moved, the way he kept his gaze low, that sent a chill down Max's spine. The man's steps were slow, deliberate, almost as if he were waiting for something. Max's ears flattened against his head, and his body stiffened as he watched the stranger move closer. Lily's father, noticing Max's shift in posture, glanced over at the man, but didn't think much of it. People walked through the park all the time, and there was nothing particularly suspicious about the man. Still, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and a strange feeling crept into his gut. He glanced down at Max, who was now walking just a little faster, his eyes never leaving the man. The stranger had now crossed the park and was standing by the playground, watching the children play. He seemed unremarkable, but there was something unsettling in his presence. Max's tail flicked nervously, his focus never wavering. Then, without warning, something snapped. A sudden movement that broke the calm. The stranger, in a swift and unsettling motion, reached into his jacket and pulled out a dark object, his hand gripping it tightly. Max's instincts flared in an instant, and his body sprang into action before anyone could fully process what was happening. Max barked loudly, his deep voice cutting through the air, startling both the family and the stranger. He lunged forward, his teeth bared, his eyes fixed on the man. The stranger, caught off guard by the dog's sudden aggression, stepped back, his face shifting from confusion to apprehension. Lily's mother screamed, pulling Lily back into her arms. "Get back, Lily!" she yelled, her heart racing in panic. The stranger's movements were swift, but Max was faster. The dog's body moved with purpose, his jaw set, his stance low. He was not about to let anyone harm his family. The stranger fumbled for a moment, his hand still on the object in his pocket, but he hesitated. Max was already in front of him, teeth bared, barking furiously. The stranger froze, looking down at Max, his fear clear now. There was no time to react. He could feel the pressure of the moment. The dog wasn't going to back down, and the last thing he wanted was to face an attack. In a sudden, desperate move, the stranger turned and bolted for the exit of the park, running at full speed. Max gave chase, but only for a moment, his body coiled with adrenaline. As the stranger reached the gate, he glanced over his shoulder once. But Max had already stopped, his body slowing as the man vanished from sight. Max stood at the entrance of the park, his chest heaving with exertion, his eyes still trained on the path the stranger had taken. His growl slowly faded, and his body, still tense, began to relax. He had protected them. He had done exactly what he was meant to do. Lily's father approached him slowly, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Max, are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with awe and gratitude. Max turned to him, his body still alert, but his gaze softened as he looked up at his owner. He had kept them safe. Again. Lily's mother, still clutching her daughter tightly, rushed over to Max, kneeling down to pet him. "Good boy, Max," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You saved us?" Lily, her wide eyes still filled with confusion, reached out to touch Max's fur. The dog lowered his head to her level, gently nuzzling her hand, as if to reassure her that everything was all right. But inside, Max was still on high alert. The storm within him hadn't fully settled. The fear of the unknown had brought it all back. The fear that danger was always lurking just beneath the surface. As the family slowly made their way back to the car, the adrenaline from the encounter still coursing through their veins, they couldn't help but feel the weight of what had just happened. The park, which had once felt like a safe haven, now seemed foreign, unpredictable, and fraught with hidden dangers. But amidst the chaos and uncertainty, Max had once again proven his worth. He had stood as their protector, unwavering in his commitment to keep them safe. The drive home was quieter than usual. Lily, exhausted from the excitement, had fallen asleep in her car seat, her small face peaceful and serene. Max, now lying at her feet, was still tense but calm enough to rest. He had done his job. But the encounter had shaken him in ways he couldn't fully understand. Lily's father glanced in the rearview mirror at Max, his voice soft as he spoke to his wife. "Max really came through for us today, didn't he?" Lily's mother nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "He always does. He's more than just a dog to us. He's a part of this family. The rest of the drive passed in silence, the weight of the day settling over them. The narrow escape had been a reminder that danger could appear at any moment, in the most unexpected forms. But through it all, Max had been their shield. Always ready, always vigilant, and always there when they needed him the most. As they pulled into the driveway, the sky began to clear, the last remnants of the storm dissipating into the horizon. Max, still watchful, stood at the front door, his eyes scanning the surroundings, ready to face whatever came next. He had been their protector, their guardian, and he would continue to be, no matter the storm, no matter the threat. For Max, there was no greater purpose than this: to protect, to love, to be the unshakable presence in a world that could change in an instant. And so, as the family settled back into the safety of their home, Max remained their steadfast companion, their silent guardian, always ready to face whatever danger the world might throw their way. His journey, though full of shadows, had led him to this, a place where he had found not just safety, but a family worth protecting with every ounce of his being. The days that followed the narrow escape were quiet but heavy. The adrenaline from the encounter still buzzed in the air, leaving the family with an unsettling sense of awareness. The world, once perceived as a safe, comfortable place, had shown its darker side once again. But through it all, Max remained steadfast, his role as protector now cemented in the family's hearts. The shift in their reality, however, wasn't easy to shake off. Max had always been an intuitive dog, ever watchful, ever alert. But his recent actions had brought to the surface the very thing that had long haunted him: fear. The fear of being helpless. The fear of losing control. The fear of not being able to protect the ones he loved. It was a fear that Max had long buried deep within himself, one that had been buried by his loyalty, by his bond with Lily, by his growing trust in the family. Yet, despite the victory in keeping them safe, the lingering shadow of that fear remained. For Lily's parents, the storm had passed, but the emotional aftermath lingered. They couldn't shake the memory of the strange man and the sudden tension that had erupted in the park. The reality of their vulnerability had struck hard. It wasn't that they hadn't felt safe in their own home, but the world beyond those four walls suddenly felt unpredictable, unknowable. They had learned to trust that Max would protect them, but in moments like this, they were reminded that safety was never guaranteed. Max lay at Lily's feet one afternoon, his eyes fixed on her every movement. She had begun to walk more confidently, her small feet taking wobbly steps across the living room. The family had grown used to this routine, Max, ever vigilant, following closely behind, keeping watch as Lily explored the world around her. The sound of her laughter echoed through the house, a sound that had become the heart of their home. But even in the midst of this new normal, Max could not forget what had happened in the park. Every time Lily toddled toward the door, every time the wind howled through the trees outside, Max's body would tense, his mind momentarily spiraling back to that dangerous encounter. His protective instincts had heightened, the pressure to keep Lily safe weighing on him like a heavy cloak. He would follow her every step, never letting her wander too far, always watching, always prepared. Lily's mother, noticing the shift in Max's behavior, could see the weight in his eyes. She had been watching him closely for days, sensing that the dog's inner turmoil hadn't fully settled. Despite his brave front, Max was carrying the burden of that day's events in ways that no one could see. She had known that Max's trauma ran deeper than just his time on the streets. It was a trauma that ran to the core of his being, a trauma that could only be healed through time, patience, and understanding. Lily's mother approached Max one evening after dinner, her steps soft on the hardwood floor as she moved toward him. He was lying by the door, his body relaxed but his eyes still alert, as if waiting for something to happen. The shadows from outside stretched long across the room as dusk settled in. "Max?" she whispered, her voice gentle. She knelt down beside him, running her hand through his thick fur. "You've done so much for us. You've kept us safe, and we're so grateful. But you don't have to carry all of this on your own." Max lifted his head, his golden eyes meeting hers. In that moment, there was no need for words. He understood. He understood the weight of the protection he had given, the responsibility he had taken upon himself. He had always been the one to guard, to shield, to fight back the darkness. But in that moment, Lily's mother recognized something in Max's eyes, a wariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "You're not alone, Max," she continued, her voice soft but firm. "We're all in this together. We will protect each other." Max's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to rest his head on the floor. He could feel the tension in his body begin to ease, the reassurance in her words seeping into him like a balm for his fractured spirit. It wasn't just the family he had been protecting. It was himself, too. It was time for him to trust that he didn't always have to be on guard. It was time to let go of the constant fear that had held him captive for so long. Lily's mother remained beside him, her hand resting on his back as she gently massaged the tension from his muscles. In that quiet moment, Max felt something stir within him, a flicker of hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that arrived in a single sweeping moment. It was a slow, steady kind of hope, the kind that grew with each act of kindness, each day of healing. The next morning, the family went on their usual walk. This time, though, something was different. The air was still, the sun shining brightly overhead, and the streets were peaceful, with the soft sounds of nature filling the spaces between the houses. As they walked through the neighborhood, Lily's father noticed a change in Max. He was still watchful, but there was a lightness in his step. His body was more relaxed, his gaze less intense. He was walking beside them instead of ahead, and he moved at a slower pace, as if he were beginning to understand that it was okay to take a moment to breathe. Lily, always the curious explorer, toddled ahead, her tiny feet stumbling slightly as she made her way down the path. Max stayed close by her side, but instead of hovering over her, he walked at her pace, his body calm and unhurried. It was a quiet victory, a moment where Max allowed himself to simply be. As they reached the park, Lily's father stopped and looked down at Max, a smile tugging at his lips. "Look at you, boy," he said softly. "You're finally letting go?" Lily's mother, noticing the same shift in Max's demeanor, smiled as well. She reached out to gently pat Max's head. "His learning, isn't he?" she said, her voice filled with warmth. "It's been a long journey, but he's finally learning that he can rest. That it's okay to rest." Max's tail gave a soft wag, and he looked up at Lily, who was now crouched down, playing with a fallen leaf. Her small hands grasped at the leaf, her eyes wide with wonder. Max bent down to nudge her gently, his nose brushing against her cheek, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The noise of the park, the distant hum of traffic, the movement of people all became background noise. In that simple moment, all that mattered was the bond between them. Max, the dog who had once been broken and lost, had found something far greater than survival. He had found love. He had found trust. And in Lily's innocent laughter and her trusting gaze, Max had found his purpose. As the family continued their walk through the park, Lily's mother leaned down to Max and whispered, "You don't have to carry the weight of the world, Max. We'll share it. Together." The words were simple, but they held immense power. Max, though still carrying the scars of his past, felt something shift within him. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to walk beside the family without fear. He was no longer bound by the weight of the world. The storm within him had quieted, and for the first time, there was peace. That night, as the family sat together in the living room, the house felt full of warmth and quiet joy. Max lay at Lily's feet, his body relaxed as he watched her play. She reached for his fur once again, her tiny hands tugging at it with innocent curiosity. Max, ever patient, allowed her to explore, the bond between them growing with each touch, each moment of trust. Lily's father looked over at Max, a quiet smile on his face. "You've come a long way, haven't you, boy?" Max looked up at him, his golden eyes soft and full of understanding. The fear, the shadows of his past, no longer held him captive. He had found his place in this family, and in their love, he had found peace. For Max, the journey of healing was not a destination, but a path. It was a path that would continue step by step, day by day. But as long as he had his family by his side, as long as he had Lily to protect, he knew he would always find his way. And so, as the night wore on and the world outside remained calm, Max rested. A quiet guardian, a loving protector, and finally, a dog at peace. The months had passed, and Max had settled into his role as the silent protector, the watchful guardian of the family. His bond with Lily had only deepened with time, and the trust between them was unshakable. Yet, as Max became more at ease in his new life, a part of him remained vigilant, always ready for any threat that might arise. He had learned to trust the safety of his home, the family's love, and the routine of their days, but deep down, he still feared that something might come along to tear it all apart. The truth was that the family had always felt secure. At least in their own minds, Max was there. He was the constant, the protector, the one who stood between them and danger. And Max, for his part, believed with all his heart that he could protect them, that he could keep them safe from anything that threatened their peace. But as they would soon find out, there are moments when even the most steadfast protector must face his greatest test, when the choice to protect comes at the highest cost. It all started with a typical Saturday morning, the family enjoying a calm breakfast together. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the wooden table. Lily sat in her high chair, happily munching on her breakfast, her giggles filling the room as her father made funny faces at her. Max, as always, was nearby, lying quietly at their feet, his eyes half closed in contentment. The morning seemed peaceful, too peaceful in a way. It was as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. Max, his usual alert self, was aware of the tranquility, but something felt different, like the calm before a storm. He didn't know why, but a subtle unease crept through him, an instinct that told him that something was coming, something that he wasn't yet prepared to face. Lily's mother, noticing Max's sudden restlessness, glanced at him. His eyes were wide, his ears perked, and his tail was stiff against the floor. She reached down to give him a gentle pat, but Max remained still, his gaze fixed on the front door. "Max," she called softly, concern lining her voice. "What's wrong, boy?" Before she could get an answer, there was a sudden, sharp knock at the door. Max's body immediately tensed, and he leaped to his feet, his tail rigid and his posture defensive. His instincts screamed that this wasn't a normal visit, that this wasn't just another neighbor or delivery person. Lily's father, equally on edge, stood up and walked toward the door, his eyes scanning the room. "I'll get it," he said, his voice steady but a hint of caution laced in his words. He walked to the door, opening it with a quiet creak. Outside stood a man, tall and gaunt, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. His expression was unreadable, his stance rigid. There was something unsettling about him, a coldness in the way he stood. He didn't smile. He didn't speak at first. Lily's father stood still, his gaze locked on the man as Max began to growl low in his throat, the hairs on the back of his neck bristling. He knew. Max knew this man was a threat. "Can I help you?" Lily's father asked cautiously, his hand resting on the doorframe, ready to close it if necessary. The man's lips curled into a thin, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm just here to talk," he said, his voice low and cold, sending a chill through the air. "I'm not looking for trouble." Max's growl grew louder, his body trembling with the urge to protect. Lily's father took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the door to shut it. But the man moved quickly, blocking the door with his hand, pushing it open just enough to slip inside. "Get out," Lily's father demanded, his voice firm, but the man's presence was overpowering. Max lunged toward him, his body filled with raw power, ready to defend his family. But before Max could reach him, the man made a sharp movement, and a faint but unmistakable glint of metal appeared in his hand. A knife, small but dangerous. "Max," Lily's father shouted, as the man took another step forward, his face twisting into something darker, more malicious. Max, seeing the weapon, acted without thinking. His body moved with the speed and precision of a predator, his instincts taking over. He was between the stranger and Lily's father in an instant, his teeth bared, his mouth open to strike. The man's eyes widened for a moment, but then a flicker of something dark passed through them. With a swift motion, he lunged forward, aiming the knife directly at Max. It was a move born of desperation, But it was also a final attempt to gain control of the situation. The blade slashed through the air, catching Max's side. Max yelped in pain, but his resolve didn't waver. He took the hit, feeling the sharp sting of the knife, but his focus remained fixed on the man before him. The pain fueled his protective instinct, pushing him forward. With a roar, Max lunged at the man's arm, his powerful jaws closing around the man's wrist. The stranger screamed in pain, dropping the knife to the floor. Max twisted, forcing the man to the ground, his body pressing the weight of his strength into the attacker. Lily's father, still shocked by the sudden violence, scrambled to grab the knife and toss it aside. He ran over to Max, pulling him off the man. But Max wasn't done, not yet. His growls were fierce, his protective nature refusing to let go of the threat.
Max, enough!
Lily's father shouted, gripping Max's collar tightly, trying to pull him back. The man on the floor groaned, clutching his injured arm, but he was no longer a threat. Max had stopped him. Max had done what he had been trained to do. The man, now on his knees, glared at Lily's father with venom in his eyes. "You don't know what you're dealing with?" he hissed. "You should have stayed out of this. This isn't over." Lily's father, still holding Max back, stepped forward with determination. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice cold and unwavering. Now, the man, bleeding from his wrist, looked at Max one last time. A look of hate, mixed with fear. Then, with a final snarl, he backed away, disappearing into the street, leaving the family standing in stunned silence. Max stood beside Lily's father, his body trembling with the aftereffects of the confrontation. His side stung, the pain of the knife wound starting to become more apparent, but his body still radiated tension. He had protected them, but at a cost. The scar of this fight would mark him physically, but there was a deeper wound that Max felt in his heart. He had almost lost control. He had nearly failed them. Lily's father turned to Max, his hands trembling slightly, as he knelt to check the dog's injury.
"You're okay, buddy,"
he murmured, his voice soft but filled with deep gratitude. "You saved us. Again." Lily's mother rushed over to Max, her face pale with worry as she examined the wound on his side. She could see the blood, but it wasn't deep. "He's hurt," she said softly, her voice filled with concern. "We need to get him to the vet right away." Lily, who had been quietly watching from her high chair, began to cry, sensing the tension in the room. Max turned toward her, his golden eyes softening. He didn't want her to be afraid. He would heal. He would always heal, just as he had before. Lily's mother gently picked her up, holding her close. "It's all right, sweetie," she whispered. "Max is going to be just fine." But Max knew the truth. He had been willing to sacrifice everything, his own safety, his well-being, to protect the ones he loved. And while the cut on his side would heal, the reminder of that sacrifice would remain with him forever. As the family rushed to get Max the medical attention he needed, they could only wonder what had driven the stranger to come to their home. What kind of danger had been lurking just beneath the surface? But no matter what happened next, one thing was clear: Max had proven, once again, that he would do whatever it took to keep them safe, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. And in that moment, there was no greater loyalty than the sacrifice he had made, the sacrifice that had kept them all safe. Max had always been more than just a dog. He was a protector, a guardian, and for the family, he had become an unwavering force. A force that would go to any length to keep them safe. The wound on Max's side healed in time, though a scar remained, a constant reminder of the sacrifice he had made. But it wasn't just the physical injury that lingered. It was the emotional toll. The weight of knowing that he had come so close to losing control, to failing the family he had sworn to protect. The days that followed were quieter, though the shadow of the encounter still hovered in the background. Max's vigilance never waned, but he had learned, slowly, that he didn't always need to be on guard. The family's love and the bond they shared were powerful enough to offer him moments of peace. Yet, the world outside was unpredictable, and Max knew all too well that danger could emerge at any moment. The family settled back into their routines, but Max couldn't forget the lesson he had learned. The lesson that sometimes, the cost of protection could be far greater than anticipated. He had been willing to sacrifice himself. But what if it wasn't enough? What if one day, something worse came along? Something that he couldn't stop, couldn't prevent. One morning, weeks after the attack, Max woke with a sense of unease. It was subtle at first, just a feeling that lingered in the back of his mind. The morning had started like any other, with the soft light streaming through the windows, and the sounds of the family waking up. Lily's laughter echoed through the house as she played with her toys, her tiny hands reaching for everything in sight. The family had breakfast together, as they always did, the air light and filled with the warmth of love, but Max's attention was elsewhere. His eyes constantly scanned the room, his ears flicking at the faintest sound. It wasn't paranoia. Not exactly. It was a deep, instinctive feeling that something was wrong. Lily's father noticed Max's unusual behavior. The dog, normally content and calm, seemed agitated. He paced around the house, his eyes darting from corner to corner. It wasn't the same as before. There was no immediate threat, no strange man at the door, but Max was still on edge. The family, unaware of the growing tension, continued with their morning, but the air had shifted. Max's instincts proved to be right. It was mid-afternoon when the family heard the sound. It was faint at first, barely audible over the noise of the wind and the hum of the air conditioner. But Max's sharp ears perked up, and within seconds, he was standing at the door. His body tense, his tail rigid. He was no longer the dog that had fought off the stranger with the knife. He was a dog on edge, a dog who knew that danger had arrived again. Lily's mother was the first to hear it. "What's that sound?" she asked, her voice quivering slightly. Lily's father stepped toward the window, peering through the blinds. The street outside was empty, and there was nothing in sight. But then he saw it. A figure moving toward their house, walking slowly but deliberately. It was a man wearing a dark jacket, his head down, his posture tense. His presence felt like a shadow, a presence that wasn't welcome. Max growled low in his throat, the sound deep and steady. He was ready, his body coiled in preparation, his instincts screaming that the threat was close. The man, though distant, was someone Max recognized in an instant. The unmistakable aura of danger surrounded him, and Max's protective instincts flared. Lily's father turned quickly, his eyes wide. "Not again," he muttered. "Get back, everyone." Lily's mother moved swiftly to the door, her eyes locked on Max. "What is it, Max?" she whispered. "Is he the one?" Max's growl grew louder, more insistent. There was no doubt now. This was the same man who had tried to harm them before. The danger had returned, but this time, Max was ready. "Call the police," Lily's father ordered. His voice was steady, but his heart raced as he ran toward the phone. "Get inside now." Lily's mother scooped Lily up into her arms, her eyes scanning the house for any other signs of danger. Max had already positioned himself between them and the door, his body tense and his growls filling the room. The sound of the approaching footsteps was growing louder, and Lily's father knew they didn't have much time. The family had no choice but to prepare for the worst. Lily's father moved to the back door, making sure it was locked. He glanced at Max, who had already positioned himself at the door, ready to defend. Max's body was a mass of tension, every muscle ready for action. It wasn't long before the doorbell rang. Max's growl intensified, a primal sound of warning. The man had reached the front porch. Lily's father looked at his wife, his face set in determination. "Stay back," he said quietly. "We'll handle this. Just stay with Lily." The doorbell rang again, and Max's growl became louder. It was clear. The man wasn't just there to talk. He was back, and this time, he had something more dangerous in mind. Lily's father took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at Max, who stood unwavering, his loyalty clear in his eyes. This was it. Max had protected them before, but now, it was time to see if their safety truly depended on him. Lily's father moved slowly to the door, his hand hovering over the handle. He knew that opening it meant risking everything. But as he glanced back at Max, he realized that he didn't have a choice. The dog had already made his choice. He would protect them, no matter the cost. The door swung open. The man, standing on the porch, gave a twisted smile, his eyes cold and calculating. "I told you this wasn't over," he said, his voice laced with venom. He didn't need to say more. The threat was clear. But before he could step forward, Max launched himself at the door, teeth bared and growling with all the force of a beast determined to defend its pack. He leaped at the man, knocking him back onto the porch, the sound of the collision echoing through the street. Lily's father, in shock, hesitated for a moment before moving toward Max. But Max was already on top of the man, his jaws clenched around the man's arm, pulling him away from the door. The struggle was quick, brutal, and fierce. Lily's father moved to call the police again, but the danger was already over. Max had done his job. He had once again kept them safe. The man lay on the ground, groaning, but Max stood between him and the family, his body shaking with adrenaline, but unwavering in his loyalty. The threat was gone. Lily's father stood in the doorway, looking at Max with awe and gratitude. "You did it again, buddy," he said softly. "You saved us." Max stood tall, his body weary from the fight, but his eyes steady, his heart still pounding. He had done what was necessary. He had kept the family safe, even at the risk of his own life. For Max, there was no greater purpose than this. And as he stood, watchful and loyal, he knew that no matter the cost, he would always protect the ones he loved. The storm, though far from over, had passed for now. And Max, their guardian, stood resolute, the silent protector, forever faithful.